We have a great program for you with a little bit of a surprise even. I'm not going to say too much about that. I'll let Patricia Cochran introduce our speakers today, our presenters. We're going to do another session very similar to Monday. We're going to have a conversation up front here at the tables. With that, Patricia, if you'd like to come up. I have been telling everybody, remember for emergency purposes, if there's an earthquake, try to find cover under the tables. And I've been pointing to everybody to use one of these exits and head out the pathway here. I'd like to point out that the farthest left doors is a closet. So don't use that one. Use the door slightly to the right where the exit sign is. All right, thank you, Patricia. Are we all mic'd up? Okay.
Good. Chris, do you need coffee or anything? You're
Nope,
good?
I'm good.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. How are we all doing? So I'm going to try to do my best impersonation of Maria Downey this morning. I know you get the blonde version, but I'll try to not be a blonde today. I want to introduce myself and then introduce our guests who are with us here today. I'm Patricia Cochran. I think most of you know. I've been with AFE for many, many, many years. Born and raised in Nome. I know that Kurt has been dying to tell you all this story about me, so I'll just get it out of the way. And I'm going to blame this story on Jacqueline Shirley. So Jacqueline, you see yourself out there in the audience? Yeah, I'm talking about you. So this is a story that comes from when Jacqueline used to be one of the primary organizers behind ATCM. So she used to get me to be the facilitator and the moderator for quite a few years there during the Alaska Tribal Conference on Environmental Management. So the gals, or the people there, started calling me Eskimo Oprah. So I'm going to tell you now, so this is going to be my Eskimo Oprah event today. So I just wanted to share that story before Kurt starts spreading it around. But it's better than my last moniker, Ben Snowball, when I was with CIRI, with Cook Inlet Native Association way back when. Used to call me the Eskimo Barbie. So I like Oprah better than Barbie. You know that humor is a really important part of all of our days, and that's sort of how we all make it through life, is remembering not to take ourselves too seriously. So with that, I want to introduce our guests this morning, and thank you very much for both of you for coming in. We have Jason Brune, who's our Commissioner of DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation. He's going to tell you a little bit more about himself. And we also have Chris Hladick, who is the EPA Regional Administrator out of Region 10. Thank you very much, Chris, for actually being able to fly up at the last minute and fill in. The DNR Commissioner was supposed to be here, but as we all know, our governor is releasing the budget today, and there's a few other things going on important in Juneau. So thanks very much, Jason, for taking some time with us as well. So I want you to just take a couple of minutes, each of you, to introduce yourselves, tell a little bit about who you are. And you know that our Alaska way of introducing ourselves is not what we do, but who we are. So I told you a little bit about me. Let's see if you can come up with some better ideas of who you are. Yeah.
Thank you, Patricia, or should I say Maria, or Oprah, or Barbie? I don't know which to call you. My name is Jason Brune, and my Tlingit name is Naish. I was adopted and about 15 years ago. My wife's family is from Southeast, and the Kaklen family and the Demert family. So that is, I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska, and I went to college in Northfield, Minnesota at Carleton College as a biologist. I came up here one of my summers in between my freshman and sophomore year. I worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the Exxon Valdez oil spill. I was boiling sea otter skulls in the lab and working on translocation and other Valdez oil spill related issues with Jim Bodkin. I eventually came up for graduate school in 1995 at Alaska Pacific University in environmental science. got all of my classwork done, finished my comprehensive exam, tried to get a grant to do small mammal microtein biology, population dynamics in spruce bark, beetle infested areas, and for some reason, they didn't fund that grant. I mean, it seems so fascinating to me, but I decided instead of generating another $40,000 in student loans on top of the $100,000 in student loans I had, I would not finish my master's. So I'm what they call an ABT, all but thesis. I worked at the university, then went to work at the Resource Development Council. Of course, I then, after 11 years at RDC, I worked for Anglo American on the Pebble Project. When Anglo left, I worked for Cook Inlet Region Incorporated. Some of my friends from CIRI are in the crowd, so great to see all of you. And then, of course, I left CIRI to work at DEC. So I am a very proud dad of 2 young children, and Alaskan children, and my wife Robin and I have been married for over 20 years. So it's a little background about me. I hope that's
Great. Thanks, Jason. Chris.
Good morning, everybody. Before I start talking about myself, I'd like to introduce Sue Detweiler. She's our Alaska Operations Office Director, located here in Anchorage. Winona Wilson is here. She's my policy advisor for all things Native American, and Tammy Fordham is here. She's the Deputy Operations Director. I came to Alaska in 1990, went to work as a Public Works Director in Galena, Alaska, and within 6 months I was the Public Works Director, the City Manager, and the Electric Utilities Supervisor. Did that for four and a half years, went to Dillingham, was a City Manager there, and then after that I went to Unalaska, and I was in Unalaska for 14 years as a City Manager, before I met Bill Walker, who offered me a job as Commissioner of Commerce for the state of Alaska. I've lived in a lot of places in rural Alaska, and there's not a whole lot of people who come from the outside that have that kind of experience, and so I'm very lucky to have lived out there and experienced the things I've experienced, from snow machining to hunting to whatever, in some of the most amazing places on the planet. And now I am the Region 10 Administrator. I always tell people I have a tendency to raise my hand at the wrong time. And I was standing next to Senator Murkowski one day at a dog race, and she asked me what I was doing and said, you know, we're really looking for somebody for Region 10. And it's like, well, I'm not looking for a job. And then, you know, I thought about it and threw my name in the ring, and lo and behold, I was offered the position, so it's an honor to do that. It's kind of different living in Seattle, but I feel like it's a good challenge to see what I can get done for Alaska in the time that I'm there. And so it's good to be back home. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you for sharing a few stories about yourselves. It always helps to know a little bit about who we are, where we come from, who our families are. So let me explain that we're going to, I'm going to ask a few rounds of questions of both of the gentlemen here, but we're also hopefully going to have some time for questions from the audience. So at your table, you'll find that there's a notepad and pen. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask of our guests at towards the end of this session, write them down, and Meg is going to collect them. There's Meg. And we'll see if we can get to some of those questions from the audience as well. So I wanted to start out this morning, though, with a few sort of overarching questions that I hope both of you will be able to respond to. So, Chris, we know that there's a new administration sort of all the way around for everybody. And at the EPA national level, I'm wondering what you think that, what's happening with the administration now, what do you think is going to happen to Alaska in the next few years?
What do I think is going to happen to Alaska? Well, we're going to continue to work on assisting with permitting and all the things that we do. We have GAP programs, the general assistance for the tribes, and we're just going to continue to work on making improvements where we can and addressing the major issues that are coming forward, one of which is on many people's minds, is the PFOS, PFOA, which there is going to be a national press conference tomorrow. I think this national press conference tomorrow on our PFOS, PFOA plan that'll come out.
So do you think that there's going to be any changes in the way that EPA works with tribes here in Alaska and other places?
Well, I hope we're going to continue to work to improve our relations with tribes. We've been working with the RTOC, the Regional Tribal Operations Committee, to make improvements to the process, and how can EPA assist the RTOC in getting things done.
Okay, and do you see any impact to gap funding, which is hugely important for our tribes here in Alaska?
I don't see any major changes in the funding. I think it'll be about the same this year and the coming fiscal year as it is now. I totally get it that it's not as much as it could or should be, but it is what we're going to get.
Okay, great. So, Jason, we know we have a brand new administration going on here in Alaska. So what do you see happening in the next few years with this new administration, and also as yourself as a new commissioner?
Thank you. I think it's incredibly important. I mean, first of all, I'm honored to be on the Dunleavy administration team. They had sent a message to the voters, obviously, that we want to show that we are open for business. And so bringing predictability to our permitting process is incredibly important to Governor Dunleavy and to me as well. And that doesn't mean lessening any environmental regulations or harming the environment. It means bringing a level of certainty to companies that are wanting to invest in Alaska, so that the projects that they bring forward can have a framework for how they can advance through a process. So I think that's incredibly important to Governor Dunleavy and me. I think as far as just kind of tagging on to what Chris was talking about, one of the things I brought to DEC is the importance to work with the tribes, with regional corporations and village corporations. One of the things that I learned when I was at CIRI was that consultation through the executive order that was issued 15 to 20 years ago to consult equally with, or to consult at the same time with regional corporations and village corporations was often ignored. And I think that those perspectives are incredibly important as well. And so I've actually brought that into CIRI. So when we're into DEC, so last week I was at CIRI, and we were talking about the Cook Inlet area-wide oil and gas program and the upcoming permitting that's going to be happening with that. And so we consulted with the Kotnu Forum. I know a number of consultations had occurred with the different tribes and villages, but I wanted to make sure that we were also consulting with the village corporations and the regional corporations as well. So I plan on making that a priority when I'm at DEC.
And how do you see that happening? How will you work that consultation with tribes and with communities?
Well, I think communication is incredibly important. So just reaching out and listening, I think it's incredibly important to understand all perspectives before you make decisions. You can't just have a decision that you want to make and push it through. You need to listen. You need to make time for all different perspectives. You need to understand those perspectives before you make decisions. So it's incredibly important.
And how about the gap funding? What do you see? Are there any changes in terms of gap funding?
I've got to be honest. I don't think that goes through DEC. I think that's just EPA.
Okay.
So I don't anticipate that we'll have a dog in that fight.
Okay. So this is another question that I've been talking with some of the people in the audience here, and PFAs have become a pretty important discussion and conversation that we're having here. Number one, I can't say what all that acronym is, so I'm going to leave it to you. Talk to us a little bit about PFAs, what they are, and why we should be concerned.
Do you want me to go first?
You can go first.
I mean, Chris obviously made an important announcement that you should all be aware of for tomorrow. I'll let him highlight on that. But in the 2 months that I've been on the job, I think I've spent a very large part of my job talking about PFAS. And these are firefighting foam is required at all of the airports in our state. It's AFFF. And this has a chemical called PFAS. PFAS are around 5,000 perfluoroalkyl substances, and they're really, really good at fighting fires. And the reason they're really good is because they don't break down at high temperatures. Unfortunately, I think they were invented 30 or 40 years ago, and they're so good at breaking them down that stopping fires that they don't break down, they get into the water systems, and many of our communities in Alaska have drinking water wells near airports where these PFAS chemicals and the AFFF are tested and used to put out fires. So when that happens, the chemicals reside in the water and people end up getting exposed to them. So we've done some emphasis on testing in rural Alaska, in airports, not just rural Alaska, but throughout Alaska, where the PFAS chemicals may have been used. And we've discovered that in King Salmon, in Dillingham, in Gustavus, and Fairbanks, there has been wells that have been impacted. So we've been working with our Department of Transportation, with Health and Social Services, to make sure that drinking water is provided to those communities that have been impacted, and that we're doing what we can to understand the impacts and try to mitigate those going forward.
Chris?
So, as I said, there's going to be a nationwide press conference tomorrow. All regional administrators will be having a press conference on the PFOA action plan, and we're going to lay out, the process, what we're doing from here. But believe me, the Environmental Protection Agency is taking it seriously. Interestingly enough, one of the places where they found it was the Catholic Church in Dillingham. It's a church I used to attend, and it was always one of the places in town that had the best water. Dillingham has a problem with iron in their water, so you can either have good water or you can have bad water, but the Catholic Church always had the best water, and even they had a spigot there where a lot of people would go to get it. So I was very surprised. I read that in the newspaper. So it's definitely an issue that I'm paying attention to, and I think we'll learn more tomorrow about what we're going to do about it.
Can you give us any ideas about how EPA and the state plans to address these issues?
Well, the state of Alaska and Region 10 have a great working relationship, and Jason and I met yesterday at lunch. We've talked on the phone once before, and I had a great relationship with Larry Hladick. I know many of the people. I knew Larry for over 20 years. So we are going to work together to address the issues as best we can. I have no doubt about that.
I think nothing is more important to Alaskans than clean drinking water.
Yes.
So it's incredibly important that we address this issue and that we work together to both understand this issue and mitigate the issue.
So we'll be hearing more about
Yes.
how the state and feds plan on helping in those issues.
Right.
Great. Yeah.
And I guess I would encourage everyone this afternoon, I believe at 2 o'clock, there's a panel on PFAS that members of my team and DOT and Health and Social Services are going to be presenting on the PFAS issue. And it's just one of the many great panels here that folks can go to.
And nationwide, it has affected approximately 1.3% of the drinking water sources. That we're just getting started on looking for it and testing for it. And we find it at military bases, wherever they either use the foam or practice with that foam.
And I think it's incredible. What's fascinating to me is that despite knowing these impacts, the federal government, FAA, still requires this foam to be at every
Right.
airport. And Commissioner McKinnon with DOT they're actually not only required to have it, they're required to test with it on an annual basis.
Right.
And Commissioner McKinnon made an executive decision, which I think is spot on, that yes, we will still have it because it works incredibly well, but we're not going to test it anymore. So I think that's a step that in the right direction, that we know it works, we know how to use it. Let's try to find alternatives to it for testing, but in the meantime, because we know the environmental impact it can have, let's not use it unless we absolutely have to.
Great. So let me remind you that Meg is out there collecting information. If you hand it to Kurt, he can go through some of those. So if there's questions, please raise your hand, and Meg will come around and pick those up. So this is sort of a follow-up question to some of the contaminants issues that we're looking at. So we all know that we have problems with on ANCSA lands where we've had a lot of contamination, a lot of concern from communities in particular about what they're seeing because of old military sites, a lot of issues that are around our ANCSA lands. Can you address this issue a little bit and describe the ways that we're going to look at cleanup of some of those ANCSA lands and others?
I'm happy to go first, whichever.
Go ahead, Jason.
Thank you, Chris. Well, I worked at CIRI for 4 years, and this was a big deal to me. The fact that ANCSA was passed 40 years ago, 50 years ago almost, and the lands, the 44 million acres that were part of that, effectively a treaty, many of them were contaminated that were given to the regional and the village corporations, is just grossly inappropriate to me. Formerly used defense sites, FAA sites, other impacted areas. The land that the regional and village corporations received should have been pristine. And so it's one of my priorities. And what we're seeing is, unless you make a fuss about it, nothing's happening. I believe there's around 800 sites that have been documented that have on ANCSA lands that are contaminated. We need to, I'm going to make a fuss about it in this position. We need to make sure that the federal government is held accountable, that we're working together with EPA to make sure the funds are found to clean these areas up. One of the ideas I've had is mitigation opportunities for companies that are developing here. Instead of creating new wetlands or putting money into mitigation banks, maybe we can have those companies, give them indemnification and have them clean up some of these contaminated lands. A win-win-win opportunity, I think, for the environment, for the federal government who doesn't have the money to clean these areas up, as well as for the companies who have the expertise to be able to mitigate some of these contaminated sites. It's a huge priority for me, and I want to make sure we address those so that the promises of ANCSA are upheld.
So I have a direct experience with formerly used defense sites, having lived in Alaska. We had an issue with the powerhouse where we wanted to make some improvements there, and we had to clean it up, and PCBs were present. And the only way to get funding from the federal government for PCB cleanup is to sue the federal government, which is, not everybody has the capacity, not all the communities have the capacity or the money to do that, to put out for the legal fees for it. So I completely understand the formerly used defense site process, understand how difficult it can be when you're in a remote area, and it may not be a high priority for the FUDS program with all the things they have going on. So we stand ready to work with anybody who has issues and try to pair people up with the right folks to get things done. It can be very frustrating, though, I can tell you that from experience.
Yeah, and I certainly know from a community perspective, it's been a real issue for decades.
Yes.
We've all been talking about it and worrying about it and watching the cancer clusters grow and just sort of all of those things that we're all very concerned with. So thank you very much for making sure that those are important priorities within your administrations.
And Patricia, I'll just add that I know that there's another meeting on Friday that's going to be taking place as part of the forum with the folks from ANTHC, DEC, and others. When I was at CIRI, we worked on these. We had a group of folks that talked about contaminated lands, and I believe it's Friday afternoon, the panel here, and its discussion is incredibly important, raising the issues. I know that there was a federal and state legislation that was passed last year that removed liability for the ANCSA corporations for contamination that may have existed pre-conveyance of that land. And that's so important that they don't feel that they're in the chain of having to take care of something that they didn't do. So Friday afternoon, I think, will be a great opportunity for folks.
Great. So as Kurt is handing me a few more questions we have here, all right. Can I ask both of you, what do you see as our biggest environmental challenge in Alaska, just from your own experience?
I think that's a relative question depending on where you live. I mean, if it's for EPA, I think the workload that we have, some of the big projects that are going on up here, and while we continue to go down in numbers in Region 10 and the nationwide, trying to get everything done is a big challenge. Of course, this PFOA thing is just emerging, and we'll be working on that. But we're constantly sort of triaging what we need to go do next, and that is a challenge.
For me, I think I would say it's consistency of application of the environmental laws that we have. I think many of us like to hold certain industries to a high standard, and we should, but then we go and we use honey buckets, or we're on our boats with our own honey buckets, and we're throwing our human waste directly into areas where we're processing or where we're harvesting fish. I think we need to hold ourselves each individually to a high environmental ethic, and make sure that as we're holding oil and gas and mining companies to a high standard, we hold ourselves to that same standard, and realize that our environmental impacts individually have cumulative impact as well. And so we should make sure we hold communities to high standards, and everyone to that same high standard.
Great. So I wanted to ask you, Jason, that in your new role as commissioner, part of what you're going to be doing is sitting on the trustee council of EVOS. And tomorrow we're going to have a really large conversation with a number of people talking about the Exxon Valdez oil spill and its legacy. So I'm wondering, what do you see? How do you see your role, and what do you expect to accomplish as a member of the trustee council?
It's a great question. Doug's here. I was on the Exxon Valdez oil spill trustee council public advisory committee for 9 years or 12. I don't remember exactly how many years it was, but for a long time. So I'm intimately aware, obviously having worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service on the spill, as well as been on the public advisory committee. So this is a keen interest to me. I've also been involved with the Sealife Center, which is one of the positive offshoots of the oil spill. I think the organization and what EVOS has, what the trustee council has done, is incredibly important in raising awareness about the importance of making sure something like that never happens again in Alaska. And I think that the science, the Gulf ecosystem monitoring science that has been done, and what we know about the Gulf is incredibly important as well. As far as what the actual trustee council is going to do, I think I have, I'm going to reserve I know that there were some efforts to try to do away with it, to give that money to organizations. I think that that's definitely something we're going to look at, but I'm reserving my judgment until I learn more.
Great. And we're going to carry on that conversation with a number of people who are not only impacted but worked on the spill tomorrow we'll have a number of really great sessions, including a morning keynote session as well. So here's some questions from the audience. It says, everyone creates waste and is happy that EPA is willing to allow tribal governments to continue use of IGAP funds to implement solid waste projects. Can the state find more money for solid waste projects?
Well, at 10:30 today, the governor is going to be announcing his new budget, and obviously the message that I think needs to resonate with Alaskans is we need to be matching our expenses with our revenues. And so finding new dollars is going to be a challenge, to be very honest. I think partnering with the EPA is going to be incredibly important. We do receive money for village water programs through matching grants that we have with the federal government. But I think that that's incredibly important, that we are fiscally responsible and where we can work with our partners at the EPA and the federal government to leverage dollars at the state level.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the solid waste projects within the EPA?
In one of the, we have a pilot project going on called the Backhaul Project that we have, 10, 12 villages that are participating and trying to get some of the hazardous waste out of the landfill stream. And I know firsthand that it's getting more and more expensive to live in rural Alaska as time goes by, whether it's the cost of fuel, the cost of shipping, just living out there, existing, and even if you do a subsistence lifestyle, it's getting more and more expensive. So we understand that you know, those costs are rising, but at the same time, we've got to figure out a way to get some of the things that are getting shipped out there to not be in the landfill that will eventually cause problems with water quality issues, et cetera, in the future.
So here's a question for Jason. It says, Hladick has proposed new action levels for 6 PFAS compounds. Will these new action levels be adopted soon?
I think with the new information that we've learned about the federal announcement tomorrow, I think that it's important that we understand what's going to happen at the federal level. I know that those regs were proposed in the previous administration, so we're currently in a position where we're not commenting publicly what's going to happen with those, but we're going to definitely evaluate the comments that came in and see what the EPA is going to be recommending before we make any additional actions.
Any comment on that, Chris?
Just that there's a lot of questions about PFAS, PFAS, and the science of it that we need to find answers to, and we need to find them quick. And that's what our action plan is going to lay out, and how we get there.
So this is sort of a huge follow-on question to that as well. So how is your agency working on climate change? Because certainly part of these questions about PFAS and all of those things, a number of forest fires we're seeing, all of those different incidents are really creating issues, and they are coming from climate change. So, woohoo! So, how is your agency working on climate change?
Well, first of all, coming from Alaska, I know firsthand that the climate is changing. There's no doubt about that. I was out moose hunting this fall in Dillingham. It was like 80 degrees for 4 days with no wind in the second week of September. So what we're doing is we're continuing to make reductions, everything we can do to enforce the laws, to continue to work towards cleaning up the environment, whether it's water quality standards, which is a huge issue in the lower 48, Superfund sites, all the things that we do, we're going to continue to do, which is helping the environment.
Jason?
I think Chris hit the nail on the head. There's no doubt that we're seeing the impacts of climate change firsthand in Alaska, more so than anyone. The coastal erosion that's occurring, the northward migration of the spruce bark beetle, their life cycles are going from a 2-year cycle to a 1-year cycle, and of course those beetle infestations are ultimately leading to huge fire impacts. So I think we're going to be having an emphasis on the mitigation in the Dunleavy administration, the potential mitigation from those impacts. I think, to be very honest with you, our economy depends on fossil fuel extraction. So we want to show Alaska is open for business, and I don't see carbon taxes being proposed by this administration or endorsed at all. But I do see that we have a recognition that there are impacts in Alaska, and that we will do our best to mitigate those impacts.
So I've been working in climate issues for about the last 30 or 40 years. That's sort of been my specialty in working with the Native Science Commission over the years that I have. From Palin administration, I think I've served in just about every capacity on climate work here in Alaska. So for me, obviously, that's a real important question as well. And certainly looking and talking with all of our communities here who are facing relocation of many villages here in Alaska. I think this is a huge problem, and I think it's really important that we place emphasis on how we're going to assist our communities in these issues that are facing not only our generation now, but certainly our kids, our grandkids, and everybody to come. It's probably one of my greatest fears is the legacy that we're leaving, all of us sitting here at the table today, what we're leaving for our kids to deal with, not only with environmental challenges, but truthfully with worldwide consequences of where we've put ourselves these days. So thank you very much for your work, and I hope you'll continue to work on these climate issues, because they're with us for the rest of our lives.
Yep.
So, I got a question here that I'm not exactly sure how to ask this, but it's a question from the audience. So, is Dunleavy pro or anti-Pebble?
I would urge you to ask him. But I can tell you the message that we want to say is that we are pro-process in this administration. We are not about sending a message to companies that we are going to pick or choose winners. We are about having a process that companies can understand what they have to do to navigate through the NEPA process and through the state permitting process. If a company can meet the high threshold, and I think no one does resource development better than Alaskans do, the care that we have, the environmental impact, the environmental ethic that we have in Alaska is second to none. And I've seen it. I've seen the way development occurs around the world. The things that we use in our lives, they demand resource extraction. The cell phones we have copper in them. They have gold. They're made of plastic. They have oil. So that demand for those resources is going to come from somewhere. So that's my environmental ethic, is think globally, develop locally. I think that no one, like I said, does resource development better than Alaska. We have the affluence, frankly, to care about our water, about our air, about our endangered species. And so when it comes to a project like Pebble, if they can meet the high hurdles that we set as a state and as a national federal government, they should be afforded that opportunity to go forward. But I think that we're reserving judgment on that project. Nothing is currently on my desk with respect to Pebble, but we will, if it does come to my desk, we will evaluate it with the same high standards that we evaluate all projects.
Chris, do you want to weigh in on that at all, or?
The process for Pebble for EPA right now is, as most people know, we had a watershed assessment and a proposed determination. And that proposed determination was based on assumptions of 3 different sizes of mine, not the actual permit application. So when the draft EIS comes out on, I believe, February 22nd, we will take a look at what has been proposed with the preferred alternative and see how that fits with our proposed determination. Some time ago, there was a lawsuit between Pebble and us, and the settlement was that we couldn't do anything with the proposed determination until the EIS was complete, not just a draft EIS, but the EIS was complete, or March of 2020. So many people think that the proposed determination is a veto of the project, but what it is a set of restrictions that if the project goes forward, this is what has to be done to protect the environment. So we're waiting to see what the draft EIS looks like right now.
Great, as are we all.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of a follow-up to that, it says, although we as a tribe are adamantly against Pebble, it feels like in the end they will get their way. Why can't it be mandatory to hire only Alaskans to ensure the money stays within the state? And again, also mandatory percentage of profits go to the state for education.
Listen, I think there are great ideas that Alaskans have for how to use the revenue that comes from any resource development project in the state. I think that, again, this goes to my consistency of application message. You look at the commercial fishing fleet, and 75 to 80% of those are non-Alaskans. So we as a country don't prohibit folks from coming to Alaska to try to find a opportunity for themselves and for their families. If we're able to, if as Alaskans there are opportunities for them, I know that they will take them. But talk to your legislators. If you want money to be, well, first of all, I don't think we're allowed to have dedicated funds in our Constitution. So if you wanted the money to be used for education or for other things, as the question proposes, I think that that might be unconstitutional. But I would urge you to, whoever asked the question, to talk to your legislators with ideas that you may have for how to use funds that may come from any resource extraction project. I don't know if that answers.
I know from personal experience, being a city manager, that the question of hiring Alaskans goes back to the pipeline. And there's been 2 or 3 lawsuits about that folks at the time wanted. Many of the pipeline folks came from Oklahoma, I believe. And so there's been several lawsuits that went to the Supreme Court that were struck down, the Alaska Supreme Court, that were struck down and said you can't require that they hire Alaskans. It would be to their, if the mine goes through, it would be to their benefit to do that, to hire as many local folks as they could. But I don't think you can require it.
Yeah. Another follow-on to that question, it says, I live in Juneau. Greens Creek Mine is near Juneau. And it is the state's exemplary mine for its environmental protection. Yet people who have cabins near me attest that they no longer see much of the fisheries in the water. 2 or 3 years ago, there was a seal hunted by Angoon village tribe that had a skyrocketing level of mercury. Despite the known threats, not much measures were taken by DEC, or more comprehensive tests were conducted. How do you foresee improving standards for environmental protection in order to protect Alaskans and our future generations?
Well, I mean, I don't know the details of that case, but I can tell you that we absolutely should have the highest standards. And so if there are higher levels of contaminants in seals, I mean, we obviously have to make sure that we know where those contaminants are coming from. Oftentimes, the fish that we eat, I mean, they go out to the many places we don't even know. So understanding where those seals might be getting those mercury levels, but touching base with HECLA and with Greens Creek to make sure that any of the tailings that are being blown off, if that could be potentially an impact. I mean, I'm committed to looking into that, but I hadn't heard that that was an issue.
So this is the last question I have, so if there are any more, please grab Meg and see if she can, if we have any more. This is the last one in hand. To Jason, you mentioned bringing certainty to permitting. Could you expand on what certainty means?
Thank you. I think predictability and understanding the what is required. What is it that we're asking for? What are the water quality standards? What are the air standards that we are going to enforce? In addition, what's the timeline for a project to go through a permitting process? Companies, and I was a casualty of it, companies realize that they don't know how long the permitting process is going to take. They don't know how long litigation may take. And so companies that I worked for example, chose to make investments in other countries because they know they could get through a permitting process, get through any litigation in 5 years, whereas projects in this state may take 10 or 15 years. One project in the state, Kensington, I think took 20 to 25 years. And yeah, there were other circumstances there that led to that timeline being very long, but that level of certainty and predictability that a company that's going to make investments in this state, be it oil and gas, mining, fisheries, you name it, are going to have a roadmap for what it takes to ultimately be able to make that huge investment their company wants to make in our state is incredibly important.
And another follow-on to that. See, Chris, you're not getting all the hard questions here. We're going to have to do something about that. Jason, how does your past appointment with Anglo influence your current perspective on Pebble Mine as the new DEC commissioner?
It's a great question. I actually think it's a huge asset for the state to have someone who understands the mining industry, who has worked behind the scenes in the mining industry to understand what it takes to build a mine, what it takes to put the environmental permits together. I think that that's an asset that the state has that and just so you all know, I don't have any vested interest in the project. I don't own any stock. I don't have any tailing or whatever future positive benefits that I may gain if the project gets a permit. I am completely free of any connections to it. So having that experience of understanding what goes into a mine, having been to mines all around the world and seen the bad things that can happen, seeing the good things that can happen, I think is going to be an asset for the state and for Governor Dunleavy's as this projects like this go forward, to be able to make sure that we're continuing to develop our resources responsibly and make sure environmental disasters don't happen in Alaska.
Okay. Has the state tested any fish for PFAS? Are any fish advisories going to be issued?
There has been some testing that has just occurred. The results for those are pending. So we want to make sure we're protecting Alaskans from from exposure to PFAS. So we're in the process of soon releasing that information.
Okay, and another one for you, Jason. It says, the Spill Prevention and Response Director of DEC is on the front line of oil spill prevention. What are your plans to maintain the spill prevention and response?
Well, first of all, Denise Coach is amazing. She has run the air program and worked in the water program, and Denise Koch, sorry I said her name wrong. She's brand new to SPAR, but she's doing a great job. I think it's incredibly important that we hold the companies that are developing our oil and gas resources to very high standards. So that's going to be a huge priority for us to make sure that we don't have situations like the Valdez oil spill ever happen again. So it's a very large priority for me.
So I think we're at the end of our questions here, but I want to give you both an opportunity to say any final closing comments or things that you'd like to say to the audience. Chris, let's start with you.
It's just good to be back home here in Alaska. I don't get to spend as much time here as I do in the lower 48. And Region 10, which is Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. And there's a lot of issues down there that we don't have in Alaska, and we want to work to make sure that we don't have them.
Jason.
For me, I want to urge each one of you to reach out to me. I'm happy to hear different perspectives. I recognize that there are some concerns about my previous history working for the Resource Development Council and a mining company, but that expertise, I think, hopefully will help us ensure that our environment is protected, but that we're also allowed to have economic opportunities in our state. If you have questions, if you have concerns, talk to me, talk to the folks that work at DEC. I have an amazing team that works to make sure that we are doing things right in this state and working on science-based, not emotion-based, but science-based permitting, and having legally defensible, timely, science-based permits is absolutely vital to ensuring our economic opportunities occur in the state that coexist with our environment. So I would urge you to chat with me or my team after this or at any point, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you both very much. We really appreciate your taking time to be with us today. Victoria Demert, who Jason, I understand, is a relative of yours.
It is.
Through marriage here. So Victoria is going to come up and say a few words.
Hello? Okay, we're on. Thank you, Patricia and Chris and Jason. And thank you to the audience for having questions and listening so politely. But this is something of such importance to us. Here at Forum on the Environment, we're all here because we're stewards of the country. We're stewards of the country that we live in. We're stewards of our communities. And we're hoping and working towards having something for our grandchildren as good as we have. And we see so much happening in our communities with the climate changes and some villages having to move. It's going to hit the world, but we're the canaries in the mine, so to speak. We're the ones who are seeing this happening to us. And so all of these things are so important to us. And I appreciate these gentlemen being here to speak and listen. And I really urge all of you to make your concerns known and open up a dialogue, because we aren't going to solve this by ourselves. We need each other, and we need people to understand what we're going through, and how can we help? How can we make sure that we're not looking, as the previous speaker said, looking to, can we live on Mars or somewhere else because we messed up our planet so bad? Let's be part of the cleanup and making sure that people will laugh at the idea of us at one time thinking that we had to leave because we messed our own nest. And we can't do that. There isn't another planet for us. And so these are really important talks that we're having. We're stewards, and stewards are those who take care of the environment. So I appreciate the dialogue, and I really do urge you, please have a conversation with these gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria.
And I also want to mention that Patricia does a magnificent job, and let's give all of them a hand.
Okay, so let me just thank the gentlemen, and thank you very, very much for spending time with us this morning. You know that normally the forum presents our guests with gifts to go home with, but we all know with the ethics considerations that these guys have to deal with these days, that mostly they're not able to do that. So we hope you'll take a coffee mug
We can do
back
that.
with you as a small token of our appreciation.
wait.
Thank you very much on behalf of the forum, and I hope that you'll all give them a very welcome and good response, good round of applause for all of their time and dedication to their work. Thank you very much.
Schönes Tschüss.
Thank you.
Brune.